If you'd like to keep up with postings on our channel, take a moment to click on the subscribe button, and also you can click on the bell icon to manage your subscription preferences. Our lesson for July 19th is entitled Good Stewards, Faithful in Service. The key verse is from Matthew 25, verse 21, which says, "His master replied, 'Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness.'" The scripture is from Matthew 25, verses 14 through 30. And the lesson focus is stewardship is faithfully entrusting what God has entrusted to us. In the overview, it says that good stewards can be described in several different ways. One such description would be faithful servants. Faithful servants utilize the talents given to them as their master would want those talents to be used. In contrast, unfaithful servants simply do as they please with their talents, having no regard for their master's wishes. In the introduction, it says that as Jesus attempted to prepare his disciples for his crucifixion and departure, he took the time to teach them about the nature of the kingdom of God at the time of his return at his second coming to earth. He first told a parable about 10 virgins, which focused on the need for proper preparation due to the uncertainty of the timing of his return. His second parable is today's lesson. In this parable, Jesus emphasized the need for faithful service because of the certainty of our accountability when he returns. Both parables provide a wake-up call to those apt to become slack in their service while waiting for the Lord's return. Today's lesson, the parable of the talents, directs us to the importance of faithful stewardship as servants in the kingdom. Since our service will be subject to assessment when the Lord returns, it is important that we learn the essence of faithful stewardship. In part 1 it says that servants determine their own faithfulness, and the text is from Matthew 25 verses 14 through 18, which says, "Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The man who had received 5 bags of gold went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 bags more. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money." Jesus began this parable by describing a man of monetary means who was going to leave his possessions in the care of 3 of his servants while he went on an extensive trip. This man did not divide his money equally between the 3 servants. Rather, he divided his assets based on the ability of each servant to handle financial affairs. One servant was given 62.5% of the total, one was given 25%, and another got 12.5%. The master knew each of his servants and determined what each was capable of doing. When we consider our responsibilities as stewards in God's kingdom, we need to remember that the amount of our trust is based on our abilities, and only God is in a position to make that determination. It is easy for us to get excited about the largeness of our trust or alarmed about the smallness of it, but the amount of our trust should not concern us. Rather, the amount of our faithfulness should be our focus. 2 servants immediately put their master's money to work. This decision required that the servants had to risk loss in order to achieve a gain. This display of faith resulted in both of them being able to double the amount that they were responsible to manage. At the same time, the servant with only 1 talent did nothing but dig a hole in the ground and bury his master's money. This action enabled him to do whatever he wanted to do without giving any more thought or effort to managing his master's money. In so doing, he would not have to take any risks or exercise any faith. It would be easy to think that the servants with 5 or 2 talents had the advantage over the single-talented servant because they had more to start with. But Jesus neither said nor implied this. At issue was the degree of faithfulness and service to the master by managing his money well. The point of the parable could have been made by any one of the 3 servants failing to properly utilize his master's money. The amount of our trust is determined by God and is his responsibility. But the amount of our faithfulness is determined by the exercise of our trust and is our responsibility. Good stewards focus on faithfulness. God expects us to be good stewards and says, "I trust you." Good stewards then utilize their talents and by so doing say to God, "We trust you." Jesus told his listeners what the servants did while the master was away. Next, he revealed what the master did upon his return. In part 2, it says that faithful service results in rewards, and the text is from Matthew 25, verses 19 through 23, which says, "After a long time the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. 'Master,' he said, 'you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I have gained 5 more.' His master replied, 'Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness.' The man with 2 bags of gold also came. 'Master,' he said, 'you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I have gained 2 more.' His master replied, 'Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness.' Upon the master's return, he required an accounting from each of the servants regarding their handling of his talents. He first met with the servant with whom he entrusted 5 talents. The servant was pleased to report that he had doubled the number of talents during the master's absence. The master's response includes the highest of praise, the opportunity for further service, and an invitation to celebrate in the good fortune of the master. The servant with 2 talents then approached the master with good news as well. He reported that he too had been able to double his number of talents from 2 to 4. This news prompted the exact same response from the master that the first servant received. This same response reminds us that it is not the quality of the talents, but the quantity of the faithfulness that attracts the master's attention. Good stewards, by their faithful service, say, "God, we trust you." In turn, God pays respect to his good stewards by saying, "I honor you." The master's words to both servants were powerful rewards for faithful service. "Well done, good and faithful servant." No greater words of affirmation can be heard than these. All sincere stewards of the Lord's service seek to be greeted in similar fashion upon entering heaven's gates. All the standing ovations of earth can't compare to this ovation from our Master. After the 2 faithful servants had given account with the master, it was time for the 3rd servant to report. But this exchange is entirely different from the first 2. In part 3, it says that unfaithful neglect will be punished, and the text is from Matthew 25, verses 24 through 30, which says, "Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. 'Master,' he said, 'I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid, and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you.' His master replied, 'You wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. Well then, You should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned I would have received it back with interest. So take the bag of gold from him, and give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. The only common item in the accounting of the 3 servants is the word master. Everything else about the third servant's report is exactly opposite from the first 2 servants. The third servant began by trying to cast the fault of his failure back on the master. The servant accused the master of being so demanding that he was afraid to take any risk with his talent, so he simply did nothing but bury it. The servant then handed the same 1 talent back to the master, hoping that in some way it would satisfy him. But the master was not satisfied. Just as the third servant's report is exactly opposite from the first 2 servants, so the master's response to this servant is exactly opposite from the one he gave to the other 2 servants. Instead of the highest praise, this servant received the strongest rebuke. You wicked, lazy servant. Instead of offering him additional service, the master took the bag of gold from him. Instead of being given an invitation to celebrate with the master, this servant was put outside and banished from the presence of his master. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. When we as servants refuse to use that which God has entrusted to us, we are, in essence, saying, God, we can't trust you. The fear of failure can lead to unfaithful neglect of our talents. But this fear of failure is not an excuse. God does not ask us to guard what he has entrusted to us, but to use it in his service. At the very least, we must attempt to produce a return for God with the talents he has given us. If by doing nothing we say, God, we can't trust you, then he must say to us, I can't honor you. These 3 servants provide us with 2 models of stewardship. The first 2 model faithful service. The last models unfaithful neglect. Each of us has the opportunity to choose which model we will follow. In today's life application, it says that by entrusting us with certain talents, God has already said, I trust you. He is expecting us to use these talents in his kingdom work. How we use or fail to use our talents tells God whether or not we trust him. If our service proves to be trustworthy, God will then entrust us with even more opportunities for service. If our service proves to be untrustworthy, God will not leave anything within our trust. It's time for a personal stewardship checkup. Is your service marked with faithful trust or unfaithful neglect? If you are being faithful, thank God for the privilege of service. If you have been unfaithful, seek to overcome your fear of failure or whatever stands between you and faithfulness, lest you suffer the punishment of neglect. What do you need to do to move further toward faithful ministry? Start today.